At 9:17 on the morning of January 22, 1943, 2nd Lieutenant John George crouched in the ruins of a Japanese bunker west of Point Cruz, watching a banyan tree 240 yards away through a scope his fellow officers had laughed at for 6 weeks, 27 years old. Illinois State Rifle Champion, 0 confirmed kills. The Japanese had 11 snipers operating in the Point Cruz groves, and in the past 72 hours, they'd killed 14 men from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. George's commanding officer called his rifle a toy. The other platoon leaders called it his mail order sweetheart. But in the next 4 days, that toy would kill 11 enemy snipers and rewrite how the US Army thought about precision shooting in jungle warfare. This is the story of how one civilian marksman with a hunting rifle proved that skill matters more than standard-issue equipment. How 14 American lives were avenged by a man the military didn't want. And how a $60 Winchester bought with National Guard pay became the deadliest weapon on Guadalcanal. George grew up in downstate Illinois during the Depression. By age 15, he could hit tin cans at 300 yards with iron sights. By 18, he was competing in state championships. By 23, he'd won the Illinois State Rifle Championship at Camp Perry in 1939. 1,000 yards, iron sights, 6-inch groups. Youngest winner in state history. When war broke out, George was teaching high school in Springfield. He enlisted in the Illinois National Guard in early 1942, became an officer through OCS, got assigned to the 1932nd Infantry Regiment. But George knew something the Army didn't. Before shipping overseas, he spent 2 years of National Guard pay on a custom setup, Winchester Model 70-bolt action rifle, 30-06 Springfield, Lyman Alaskan 2.5x scope, Griffin and Howe scope mount. The entire package weighed 9 pounds 12 ounces, more accurate than any military rifle issued to American forces, and completely unauthorized. When George unpacked it at Camp Forest in Tennessee, the armorer wanted to know if he was planning to hunt deer or Germans. George said neither. It was for the Japanese. The armorer laughed. Captain Morris, George's company commander, told him to leave the sporting rifle in his footlocker and carry a real weapon, like everyone else. George carried it anyway. The 132nd Infantry shipped out in November 1942, but George's rifle didn't. Some bureaucrat in supply decided unauthorized weapons couldn't be transported on military vessels. The rifle went to a warehouse in Illinois. 6 weeks later, in late December 1942, a wooden crate marked fragile arrived on a supply ship. Inside was George's Winchester. By then, the 132nd had already relieved the Marines on Guadalcanal. George finally had his rifle, but nobody would let him use it. The problem wasn't just the weapon, it was doctrine. US Army doctrine in 1940, too, had no official sniper positions. Officers were supposed to lead men, not hide in foxholes taking pot shots at distant targets. And George's bolt-action rifle, 5 rounds, manual cycling, looked pathetically inadequate compared to the Garan's 8-round semi-automatic capability. Captain Morris made it clear during a briefing at Mount Austin. "Lieutenant, your job is leading 2nd Platoon, not playing sharpshooter. That toy stays in your tent." George nodded, said yes sir, then carried the Winchester on every patrol anyway. Mount Austin was hell. The Japanese called it the Gifu, a fortified position with 500 defenders in 47 bunkers. The 132nd attacked on December 17, 1942. They fought for 16 days, 34 killed, 279 wounded. Through all of it, George never fired his Winchester once. The jungle fighting was too close, range too chaotic, no clear sightlines beyond 50 yards. By January 2, 1943, the 132nd had taken Mount Austin's western slope. Then they moved west toward Point Cruz, and everything changed. The Point Cruz groves were different terrain. Just massive banyan and coconut trees where Japanese soldiers who'd retreated from Henderson Field had dug in. Some of those soldiers were snipers, Professionals with scoped Arisaka Type 38 rifles, men trained specifically for jungle warfare, and they were killing Americans faster than malaria. January 19th, Corporal Davis shot through the chest while filling canteens at a creek. January 20th, 2 men from L Company killed during patrol. January 21st, 3 more dead. 1 took a round through the neck from a sniper they never even saw. In 72 hours, Japanese snipers had killed 14 Americans in the Point Cruz groves. That night, the battalion commander summoned George to headquarters. "Lieutenant, I hear you've got some kind of special rifle. Can it actually hit anything, or is it just for show?" George explained his credentials. Illinois State Champion, 1939, 1,000-yard competition. The commander nodded. "You've got until tomorrow morning to prove it. If that mail-order rifle can kill these bastards, I'll personally apologize. If it can't, that thing goes in storage." If you've ever wondered what separates trained soldiers from championship marksmen, you're about to find out. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this plays out. George spent the night of January 21st preparing. He field-stripped the Winchester, cleaned every component, checked the scope mounts. At dawn on January 22nd, he moved into position in the ruins of a Japanese bunker his battalion had captured 3 days earlier. The bunker overlooked the coconut groves west of Point Cruz. He brought no spotter, no radioman, just his rifle, a canteen, and 60 rounds of ammunition. George settled in and began glassing the trees through his scope. The Lyman Alaskan's 2.5x magnification wasn't much, but it was enough to see details the naked eye would miss. Japanese snipers climbed before dawn, stayed motionless all day, picked their shots carefully. Finding them required patience and the ability to distinguish natural patterns from human disruption. At 9:17, George saw it. A branch moved in a banyan tree, 240 yards out, no wind. Just a small shift. He watched. The branch moved again. Then he saw the shape, a man in dark clothing, positioned in a fork where 3 branches met, 87 feet above the jungle floor. The Japanese sniper was facing east, watching the trail where the 132nd had been moving supplies. George made his adjustments, 2 clicks right for wind, controlled his breathing, settled the crosshairs. The Winchester's trigger broke clean. The rifle kicked, 240 yards away. The Japanese sniper jerked and fell, tumbling 90 feet through the branches before hitting the ground. 1 shot, 1 kill. But Japanese snipers worked in pairs. George worked the bolt, chambered another round, kept his scope on the surrounding trees. 17 minutes later, he found the second sniper, different tree, 60 yards north of the first. This one was climbing down, retreating. George led the movement slightly, fired. The second sniper fell backward off the tree. 2 shots, 2 kills in 26 minutes. George reloaded and waited for a response. It came at 11:21, when a Japanese bullet struck the sandbag 6 inches from his head. He was already rolling left toward the bunker wall. The shot had come from southwest. A third sniper, positioned to cover his partners. George waited 3 full minutes before moving, found the shooter at 11:30, 873 feet up in a cluster of banyans. George fired. The third sniper fell without making a sound. By noon, George had killed 5 Japanese snipers. 5 shots, 5 kills at ranges between 190 and 290 yards. Word spread through the 132nd. The officers who'd mocked his mail order rifle were suddenly very quiet. Captain Morris showed up and told George to be back in position at dawn. No apology yet, but no more mockery either. January 23rd started with rain. George waited. When visibility cleared at 9:12, he'd spotted another sniper and killed him. The 6th kill, then at 9:57, Japanese mortars began hitting the area around his bunker. They'd triangulated his position. George grabbed his rifle and ran, diving into a shell crater, as the third salvo obliterated the bunker he'd occupied seconds earlier. He relocated to a fallen tree 120 yards north. By 5 p.m., he'd killed 2 more snipers, 8 total in 2 days. 12 rounds fired, 8 hits, 4 misses. The battalion commander extended the mission indefinitely. That night, George ran the numbers. 11 Japanese snipers, total operating in the area, 8 now dead, 3 remaining. Those 3 would be the smartest, the most experienced, and they now knew exactly what he looked like and what rifle he carried. January 24, 7:43 a.m. George moved to a new position, a cluster of rocks the Marines had used as a machine gun nest. At 8:17, he found sniper number 9, palm tree, 190 yards out. Low position, only 40 feet up. George aimed, began to squeeze the trigger, then stopped. Something was wrong. The position was too obvious. The remaining 3 wouldn't make elementary mistakes, unless it was bait. George lowered his rifle and scanned surrounding trees. 11 minutes later, he found the real threat. Banyan tree, 80 yards northwest of the palm, 91 feet up. Perfect hide position. The Japanese were learning his tactics, setting traps. George made his decision. He aimed at the decoy sniper in the palm tree and fired. The decoy fell. George immediately swung his rifle toward the banyan, 91 feet up. The real sniper would turn toward the sound. George saw it, a slight shift. He fired before the sniper could fully turn. The real threat fell. 2 shots, 2 kills. But George had revealed his position. He grabbed his rifle and ran. At 8:34, Japanese machine gun fire raked the rocks where he'd been 6 seconds earlier. George relocated to a shell crater partially filled with rainwater. 10 confirmed kills, 1 remaining. At 9:47, George realized his mistake. The 11th sniper wasn't in the trees. He was on the ground, moving toward George's position. George caught the movement. 60 yards south, low crawl through undergrowth. The Japanese sniper was turning the hunt around. George remained motionless in the water. At 10:03, the Japanese sniper reached the rocks and took up a position facing east. His back was exposed 38 yards. Easy shot. But George hesitated. This sniper had survived 10 days of American operations. The exposed position had to be another trap. George kept his scope on the sniper, but expanded his awareness. At 10:06 he found it. A second Japanese soldier, 70 yards northwest, behind a fallen tree trunk. 2 men, not 1. The final 2 snipers working together. George slowly lowered himself deeper into the water until only his eyes remained above the surface. At 10:13, the Japanese soldier in the rocks stood up. Both men began moving east, a coordinated sweep. They moved past George's crater. Their backs were now exposed. George rose from the water slowly, silently. He aimed at the closer soldier, 42 yards away. Fired, the soldier dropped. George worked the bolt, swung toward the second soldier. The man was turning, raising his rifle. George fired first. The second soldier fell. 11 shots, fired over 4 days. 11 Japanese snipers dead. But as George climbed out of the crater, he heard voices, Japanese voices, multiple men. Infantry, a patrol or recovery team. George dropped back into the crater. At 10:28, they began moving toward him. They'd found his tracks. At 10:31, a Japanese soldier appeared at the crater rim, looking down directly at him. George fired from the water. The soldier fell backward. George worked the bolt, rose up. 2 more soldiers at the crater. Rim he fired, worked the bolt. Fired again. Both dropped. 3 rounds left. More soldiers approaching. He climbed out and ran 20 yards, dropped behind a fallen tree. Japanese rifle fire cracked through the jungle. George saw movement. 2 soldiers advancing, 50 yards out. He aimed, fired. The soldier dropped. 2 rounds left. More voices behind him. The Japanese were flanking. George couldn't win a firefight with a bolt-action rifle against multiple soldiers with semi-automatics. He ran north, sprinting through undergrowth. Japanese rifle fire followed him. He ran for 90 seconds before diving into another crater. The Japanese voices were distant now. They weren't pursuing. George checked his rifle, mud on the stock. water dripping from the barrel, 2 rounds left. At 10:47, he began moving northeast toward American lines. At 11:13, he reached the American perimeter. Captain Morris was waiting at battalion headquarters. George provided the debrief. 11 Japanese snipers killed over 4 days. 12 rounds fired against the snipers, 11 hits. Then a firefight with infantry, 3 more kills. Morris told him to clean his rifle and rest. At 2 p.m., word came from division headquarters. The battalion commander wanted to see him. George expected a reprimand. Instead, he found Morris and Colonel Ferry, the regimental commander. Ferry had one question: could you train other men to do what you did? George said he could try, but it would require time, rifles with optics, and men who could already shoot. Ferry said division had 14 Springfield rifles with inertial scopes, and Ferry had 40 men who'd qualified as expert marksmen. He wanted George to create a sniper section. George accepted, but had one condition. He wanted to keep his Winchester. Ferry approved immediately. The 14 Springfield rifles went to the men George would train. George kept his mail. Order rifle, the toy that had killed 11 enemy snipers and proven that skill mattered more than standard equipment. Training began January 27th. George had 40 men assembled at a makeshift range. By January 30th, 32 of the 40 men could consistently hit man-sized targets at 300 yards. George divided them into 16 two-man teams. February 1st, George took 4 teams into the field. Over 6 hours, his team engaged 8 Japanese soldiers, 7 shots, 6 kills, 1 miss. The other 3 teams reported similar results. 23 Japanese soldiers killed that day, 0 American casualties. The sniper section continued operations through early February. By February 9th, they'd killed 74 Japanese soldiers. On February 7th, George was shot. A Japanese rifleman hit him in the left shoulder. The bullet passed through muscle without hitting bone. George was evacuated to a field hospital. 2 weeks later, the Japanese completed their evacuation of Guadalcanal. The campaign was over. George's sniper section had operated for 12 days, 74 confirmed kills, 0 friendly casualties during sniper operations. Colonel Ferry recommended George for a Bronze Star, but George's war wasn't finished. Orders came from Pacific Command. The Army needed experienced officers for a new mission in Burma. George volunteered. The unit was Merrill's Marauders. George was assigned to 2nd Battalion as a rifle platoon leader. The Burma mission involved long-range patrols, hundreds of miles through jungle. George modified his Winchester, replaced the scope with a lighter version, switched to a synthetic stock. The Marauders entered Burma in February 1944. George's battalion began the march February 24th. George used his Winchester 3 times during the march, 3 shots, 3 kills. But Burma was different from Guadalcanal. Most combat happened at close range where scoped rifles offered no advantage. By May, the Marauders had captured Mikiaina airfield, but the unit was combat ineffective. George survived. His Winchester survived, but the rifle saw limited use. George returned to the United States in July 1944, promoted to captain, assigned to Fort Benning training duties. He was discharged in January 1947 as a lieutenant colonel, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Purple Heart, combat infantry badge. He returned to Illinois, enrolled at Princeton on the GI Bill, studied politics, graduated with highest honors in 1950. After Princeton, 4 years at Oxford, then 4 years in British East Africa, eventually settled in Washington, D.C. as executive director of the Institute of African American Relations, later joined the State Department as a consultant. George never spoke publicly about Guadalcanal during those years. In 1947, George documented what had happened. He wrote for 6 months, 400 pages of technical detail. The book was published as Shots Fired in Anger. It became a classic among firearms enthusiasts and military historians. The book is still in print today. George lived to see 3 more American wars. Watched military rifles evolve from the Garand to the M14 to the M16. Watched sniping become a formal specialty with dedicated training. John George died January 3, 2009, at age 90. The Winchester Model 70 that killed Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal was donated to the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia. It sits in a display case. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It looks like any other vintage hunting rifle. But it is not. It is the rifle that proved a state champion marksman with a mail-order scope could outshoot professionally trained military snipers. The rifle that cleared Point Cruz groves in 4 days when an entire battalion couldn't do it. In 2 weeks, the rifle that changed how the American military thought about individual marksmanship in modern warfare. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Real people, real heroism, real history that deserves to be remembered. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you are watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. Our community stretches worldwide. You are not just a viewer, you are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure John George doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.